The morning of May 4th, 1945, Radar Picket Station Number 1, 60 miles northwest of Okinawa. In the Combat Information Center of USS Morrison, radar operator Seaman James Patterson watched phosphorescent sweeps paint contacts across his screen. 43 aircraft, bearing 320 degrees, range diminishing, 18 miles and closing fast. Commander James Hansen reached for the radio handset, his voice calm, deliberate. Multiple raids inbound. Request immediate fighter support. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What Morrison's crew could not have known was that their ship's radar, that miraculous eye that could see beyond the horizon, had already sealed their fate. The Japanese Kamikaze pilots approaching through the dawn sky had been training for precisely this moment. They had studied American radar capabilities. They had learned to exploit its weaknesses. And they understood with crystalline clarity that the isolated destroyers positioned around Okinawa, those electronic sentinels standing guard, represented both the greatest threat to their mission and the most vulnerable targets in the American fleet. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Destroy the radar pickets, and the invasion fleet becomes blind. Overwhelm the destroyers before help arrives, and the path to the carriers and transports lies open. One pilot, one obsolete aircraft, one American destroyer. The exchange rate, by Japanese calculations, favored sacrifice. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Pacific War had transformed American destroyers from hunters into hunted. By April of 1945, Admiral Raymond Spruance had positioned 16 radar picket stations in a protective ring around Okinawa, each manned by destroyers, equipped with the most sophisticated detection equipment the United States Navy could produce. These ships carried more than steel and ammunition. They carried the technological edge that had begun to define modern warfare. The SC-2 air search radar aboard Morrison could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 60 miles. The SG surface search system maintained continuous coverage of surrounding waters to 15 miles. Mark 12 and Mark 22 fire control radars locked onto individual targets with precision impossible through optical sights alone. The SP height-finding radar calculated aircraft altitude for fighter interception, each system feeding data into the Combat Information Center, where trained operators transformed electronic signals into tactical awareness. Lieutenant Frank Manson, Morrison's assistant communications officer, had spent months learning to interpret the green glow of radar scopes. The technology still seemed miraculous. Traditional lookouts might spot approaching aircraft at 5, perhaps 10 miles under ideal conditions. The radar saw them at 60. Traditional optical gun directors required visual contact to engage targets. Radar-guided fire control could track and destroy aircraft hidden in clouds, darkness, or the glare of the rising sun. But the Japanese had learned about American radar capabilities through bitter experience. After the catastrophic defeat at the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, where radar-directed American fighters had destroyed over 400 Japanese aircraft, Imperial Navy intelligence had begun systematic analysis of American electronic warfare capabilities. Captured documents, interrogation of downed pilots, and direct observation during combat had revealed both the power and the limitations of American radar systems. Japanese tactical doctrine evolved accordingly. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commanding the 5th Air Fleet from Kyushu, had circulated detailed instructions to kamikaze units. The Americans' radar could not detect aircraft flying at wavetop height until they approached within 15 miles. The radar struggled to distinguish individual targets in large formations that suddenly dispersed. The systems experienced difficulty tracking aircraft that approached over land before turning toward ships at sea. And most critically, the radar picket destroyers operated in isolation, 30 to 60 miles from mutual support, deliberately positioned to attract attacks away from the main fleet. The Imperial Japanese Navy's training manual for special attack units, recovered from a crashed kamikaze aircraft in late April, specified 3 approach methods designed specifically to evade radar detection. The high-altitude approach, using cloud cover and diving from positions directly overhead where shipboard radar had limited coverage. The low-altitude approach, maintaining wave-top height until the final attack run. And the land-masking approach, flying over Okinawa's terrain, where ground clutter confused American radar operators before breaking toward targets at sea. At Kanoya Airfield on Kyushu, Lieutenant Yukio Seki reviewed final instructions with pilots of the 201st Air Group. Operation Kikusui, No. 3. Floating Chrysanthemums. 165 kamikaze aircraft, supported by conventional bombers, would strike American forces around Okinawa in coordinated waves. The pilots ranged in age from 17 to 32. Flight experience varied from less than 100 hours to several hundred. Navigation training had been minimal. 2 days of formation flying, 3 days of approach and attack practice against targets that did not maneuver or shoot back. Ensign Teruo Yamaguchi had exactly 73 hours of flight time when he volunteered for special attack duty. His training had focused on 3 essential skills: identifying ship types from silhouettes shown in recognition manuals, maintaining formation during the transit to the target area, and executing the final dive that would transform his Nakajima B-6N torpedo bomber into a guided bomb carrying 1,200 pounds of explosive directly into an American warship. The briefing officer had been explicit about American radar capabilities. The destroyers positioned around Okinawa would detect their approach at extreme range. American fighter aircraft, guided by radar controllers aboard those destroyers, would intercept them 50 miles from the fleet. The kamikaze pilots must expect coordinated defense. Multiple destroyers concentrating fire, fighter aircraft attacking from altitude advantage, anti-aircraft fire of unprecedented accuracy and volume. But the briefing officer had also emphasized Japanese advantages. The Americans could not maintain fighter coverage over every radar picket station simultaneously. The distances were too vast. Response time from carriers to outer picket stations exceeded 20 minutes. During those minutes, kamikaze formations approaching at 250 miles per hour would close the distance, break through the fighter screen, overwhelm the isolated destroyers with mass attacks that saturated defensive fire control systems. The mathematics appeared favorable. American intelligence estimated Japanese forces had lost approximately 1,500 aircraft during March and April. But Japanese industrial facilities, despite heavy bombing, continued producing aircraft. The quality had declined precipitously. Obsolete trainers pressed into combat service, fabric-covered biplanes carrying minimal ordnance, even wooden aircraft when metal became scarce. But each airframe could carry a pilot and enough explosive to damage or sink an American ship. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who had organized the first official kamikaze unit in October of 1944, understood the desperation underlying the tactic. Conventional attacks achieved hit rates of less than 2% against heavily defended American ships. Even the most skilled pilots, attacking with the element of surprise, rarely exceeded 10% success rates. But kamikaze attacks in the Philippines had achieved hit rates exceeding 30%. When the aircraft itself became the weapon, when the pilot provided terminal guidance until impact, accuracy increased dramatically. The exchange rate justified the sacrifice by Japanese military calculations. One pilot with minimal training, flying an obsolete aircraft worth perhaps $10,000, could sink an American destroyer worth several $1 million and kill hundreds of sailors who represented years of training investment. If 1 in 3 kamikaze aircraft successfully struck targets, the ratio favored Japan despite overwhelming American material superiority. But those calculations had not accounted for American radar picket destroyers and the integrated defense networks they controlled. The mathematics changed when destroyers could detect approaching raids at 60 miles and direct fighter aircraft to intercept them 40 miles from the fleet. Changed again when proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells detonated automatically near targets without requiring direct hits. Changed fundamentally when isolated destroyers proved capable of coordinating their defense with carrier-based fighters, nearby support craft, and other picket stations through radio networks guided by radar tracking. Aboard Morrison at Radar Picket Station Number 1, the situation developed exactly as Japanese tactical doctrine predicted and exactly as American defensive planning feared. The radar had provided early warning. The combat air patrol of 4 F-4U Corsairs had been vectored toward the approaching raids. But 43 aircraft attacking simultaneously from multiple directions exceeded the capacity of 4 fighters to intercept. Fighter Director Lieutenant Commander Robert Hoffman watched the radar plot with growing concern. The Japanese formation had approached as a single mass until reaching 25 miles from the picket station, then dispersed. Split into multiple groups attacking from north, northeast, and northwest simultaneously. Classic kamikaze tactics designed to overwhelm coordinated defense. The 4 Corsairs engaged the northernmost group, shot down 3 aircraft, damaged 2 others severely enough that they turned back toward Kyushu, trailing smoke, but the remaining groups continued inbound. Morrison's 5-inch guns opened fire at 12,000 yards. The Mark 37 gun director with Mark 25 radar tracking targets automatically. Fire control solutions computed continuously, shells detonating in proximity to aircraft without requiring direct hits. The first Kamikaze, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, exploded 600 feet from Morrison's port beam, proximity fuse functioning perfectly. The second crashed into the sea 100 yards from the starboard side after absorbing multiple 40mm hits. The third managed to drop a near-miss bomb before being destroyed by concentrated fire from Morrison's starboard battery. But the fourth broke through. At 0825 hours, the Judy struck Morrison's number 1 stack and bridge structure. The impact destroyed radar systems, main battery fire control, and radio communications. 14 men died instantly. Fires erupted across the superstructure. Electrical power failed throughout forward sections. Gunner's mate William Mann, stationed at Mount 43, recalled the pilot's face clearly through the plexiglass canopy as the aircraft approached. The first one to hit us was close enough you could just see the guy sitting there in the cockpit smiling. He was just as happy as he could be. 2 minutes later, a second kamikaze struck gun mount number 3 on the port side. The explosion killed the entire gun crew and severed communications between the bridge and after section. A third aircraft, possibly a Nakajima B-6N Kate, crashed into gun mount number 5 at 0827. The detonation destroyed Morrison's after-fire control systems and started uncontrollable fires in the after magazine. Commander Hansen ordered damage control parties to flood the magazine before ammunition explosion destroyed the ship, but Morrison had lost primary fire control, radar tracking, radio communications, and more than 60% of her anti-aircraft armament. The destroyer circled helplessly, rudder jammed, speed reduced to 4 knots, while additional kamikaze aircraft pressed their attacks against the crippled vessel. A fourth aircraft struck the port side amidships at 0830. The explosion ruptured the forward engine room and started flooding. Morrison began listing severely to starboard. A fifth kamikaze crashed into the afterdeck house seconds later, starting fires that spread toward remaining ammunition magazines. At 0832, Morrison rolled over and sank. The destroyer had been under attack for exactly 7 minutes. Of her 331 crew members, 152 were killed or missing. The survivors spent hours in oil-covered waters before rescue craft arrived. Landing craft support Large 84, positioned 2,000 yards from Morrison's station, had observed the entire attack. Her commander, Lieutenant Howard Charing, had vectored the combat air patrol, coordinated anti-aircraft fire from support craft, and radioed for additional fighter support, but the distance was too great, the response time too long. By the time reinforcements arrived from the carriers, Morrison had gone down. The destroyer Ingraham, racing toward picket station number 1 at flank speed, arrived 40 minutes after Morrison sank. Her combat information center tracked 6 additional kamikaze aircraft approaching from the north. The integrated defense network that radar had created was functioning. But for Morrison's crew, the technology had failed its ultimate test. Early warning, without sufficient firepower to exploit that warning. Detection without defense. electronic eyes without the weapons to destroy what those eyes could see. The irony was profound and terrible. Morrison's radar had functioned perfectly until the moment of impact, had detected approaching raids at maximum range, had tracked individual aircraft with precision, had directed fighters and coordinated defensive fire. The technology had performed exactly as designed, but the fundamental vulnerability remained unchanged. A destroyer operating in isolation, deliberately positioned to attract attacks, could be overwhelmed by mass assault regardless of technological superiority. Japanese pilots returning to Kyushu reported the attack's success. One destroyer confirmed sunk, multiple aircraft destroyed by defensive fire, but the target eliminated. The exchange rate had favored Japan. Approximately 10 aircraft and pilots lost, 1 American destroyer sunk, 152 American sailors killed, several $1 million in equipment destroyed. But the returning pilots also reported observations that troubled Japanese commanders. The American destroyer had detected their approach at extreme range, perhaps 60 miles or more. Fighter aircraft had appeared with impossible speed, suggesting radar-guided interception. Anti-aircraft fire had been devastatingly accurate, with shells exploding near aircraft without apparent direct hits. Even after the destroyer had been struck multiple times and was clearly sinking, her remaining guns continued firing with coordinated precision. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Vice Admiral Ugaki noted in his diary the increasing effectiveness of American defenses despite successful kamikaze attacks. Our pilots report that the Americans seem to see our aircraft forming up over our own airfields. They track us across hundreds of miles of ocean. Their gunfire explodes exactly where our aircraft fly, as if guided by invisible hands. We achieve success only through overwhelming numbers and accepting catastrophic losses. The radar picket system had created an invisible battlefield where detection preceded engagement by dozens of miles and dozens of minutes, where controllers in air-conditioned compartments directed fighters toward targets the pilots could not yet see, where gunners fired at electronic representations on radar scopes rather than visual targets. The age of electronic warfare had arrived, and the Japanese military establishment, despite understanding its implications, lacked the industrial capacity to develop equivalent capabilities. The tactical evolution became apparent during the 10 massive Kikusui operations conducted between April 6 and June 22, 1945. Each operation launched hundreds of kamikaze aircraft against the radar picket line and the main fleet beyond. Each operation revealed both the power and limitations of American radar-directed defense. Each operation demonstrated that technology alone could not guarantee survival when human determination met electronic capability in the crucible of modern warfare. USS Laffey's experience on April 16th illustrated the transformation of naval combat into a contest between radar-guided defense and suicide attack. The destroyer had relieved USS Bush at Radar Picket Station No. 1, the most dangerous position in the entire defensive network. Commander Frederick Beckton understood the mathematics clearly. Station 1 bore the brunt of attacks from Kyushu, the southernmost Japanese home island, only 340 miles distant. Previous destroyers at this station had been sunk or severely damaged. The average survival time was measured in days, not weeks. At 0727 on April 16th, Laffey's radar detected a single aircraft bearing 020 degrees at 11 miles. The contact approached at wave-top height, using the morning sun for concealment and the radar horizon to mask its approach until the last possible moment. Commander Beckton ordered hard right rudder and flank speed. The destroyer heeled sharply, accelerating past 30 knots, her wake boiling white across blue Pacific waters. The Yokosuka D-3A Val dive bomber adjusted its approach angle, aiming for Laffey's bridge structure. At 2,000 yards, all starboard guns opened fire. The Val absorbed dozens of hits from 40mm and 20mm weapons. Pieces of aircraft skin tore away. The engine began trailing smoke, but the pilot maintained course. At 500 yards, a 5-inch proximity-fused shell detonated directly beneath the Val. The explosion tore off the port wing and sent the fuselage cartwheeling into the sea 50 yards from Laffey's hull. But this engagement represented merely the opening movement of an 80-minute symphony of destruction. At 0800, the Combat Information Center reported multiple raids converging on Station 1, estimated 50 aircraft in separate groups. The 4-plane Combat Air Patrol engaged immediately but found itself hopelessly outnumbered against coordinated attacks from multiple directions. What followed became one of the most intense ship versus aircraft engagements in naval history. 22 kamikaze aircraft would attack Laffey individually and in groups over the next hour and 20 minutes. The destroyer's survival depended entirely on the integration of radar detection, fire control coordination, and the desperate courage of gun crews who understood that mathematics favored the attackers. The radar systems provided continuous tracking. The Mark 37 director automatically computed firing solutions. The proximity fuses multiplied defensive effectiveness. Gun crews maintained maximum rate of fire regardless of hits observed, switching to new targets immediately upon destroying the previous threat. No celebration, no pause. The next aircraft was always seconds away. Laffey's gunners destroyed the first 8 kamikaze aircraft with devastatingly accurate fire. The Combat Information Center's radar tracking allowed the gun director to engage targets simultaneously. The proximity fuses eliminated the need for precise range estimation. Shells detonated automatically when passing within lethal radius of aircraft, creating expanding spheres of steel fragments that shredded wings, punctured fuel tanks, and killed pilots in their cockpits. At 0827, the 9th kamikaze overwhelmed the defensive fire. A Judy dive bomber approaching from astern, where fewer guns could bear, struck gun mount 53 despite taking multiple hits. The explosion killed 6 men instantly and destroyed 16% of Laffey's heavy firepower. Fires erupted across the fantail. Ammunition began cooking off. Mount Captain Gunner's mate First Class Lawrence Dowski died at his station, directing the mount in local control after radar direction failed. The 10th kamikaze struck minutes later. Another Judy attacking from the port quarter crashed into the after deckhouse, destroying 2 20mm mounts and their crews. Fires spread toward the after magazine. Damage control parties fought desperately to contain flames, while gunners continued engaging new attackers. The 11th attacker dropped a bomb that penetrated between the stacks before exploding in the machine shop. The blast ruptured steam lines and knocked out electrical power. Gun mounts 42 and 43 lost power and had to be operated manually. Rate of fire dropped dramatically. Accuracy decreased as crews cranked gun mounts by hand while aircraft maneuvered at 300 miles per hour. At 0900, Laffey faced her most desperate moment. 4 kamikaze aircraft attacked simultaneously from different directions. The overwhelmed fire control system could only track 2. The radar provided detection but insufficient weapons to engage all threats. The first Val crashed into the forward mount. The second struck the port side near the waterline. The third dropped a bomb that exploded in the after-engine room. The fourth was destroyed 100 yards from the ship by desperate close-range fire from a 20mm mount, whose gunner, Seaman Ari Foutrides, stayed at his position despite shrapnel wounds and burns from nearby fires. Laffey was burning from bridge to stern. Her rudder jammed hard left, forcing the ship into a continuous circle. Speed reduced to 8 knots, 1/3 of her crew casualties. 6 gun mounts destroyed or damaged. Commander Beckton received damage reports from all departments. The situation was critical but not hopeless. Forward guns still functioned. Damage control teams were containing fires. The ship remained afloat despite massive damage. When Assistant Communications Officer Lieutenant Frank Manson asked if they should prepare to abandon ship, Beckton's response became legendary. "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire." A nearby lookout added quietly, "And if I can find one man to fire it." 4 more kamikaze aircraft attacked in the next 20 minutes. The surviving gunners destroyed 3. The fourth, a Zero carrying a 550-pound bomb, crashed into the base of the forward stack. The explosion lifted the entire bridge structure before slamming it back down. Every man in the Combat Information Center was knocked unconscious momentarily. When they recovered, thick smoke filled the compartment. Radar scopes flickered and died. For 3 critical minutes, Laffy was blind and mute. The technological advantage eliminated, the electronic eyes extinguished. The 20th Kamikaze approached during this chaos, without radar warning or coordinated defense. Individual gun crews engaged on their own initiative, using optical sights and human judgment, the methods their predecessors had used before radar transformed naval warfare. Gunner's Mate First Class, Robert Carr, operating Mount 44 in manual mode, spotted the Val diving from 8,000 feet. Despite the mount functioning without power or fire control direction, his crew maintained tracking and fired continuously. The Val exploded 500 feet above the ship, showering debris across the forward deck. The 21st Kamikaze came from astern, hidden in the smoke of Laffy's own fires, a Kate torpedo bomber at wave height. It aimed for the forward magazine, seeking the catastrophic explosion that would finish the crippled destroyer. Seaman Foutrides, still at his damaged 20mm mount despite wounds and exhaustion, saw the aircraft emerge from smoke 400 yards away. He triggered a long burst, walking, tracers into the Kate's engine. The aircraft staggered, nose down, and crashed 30 yards from Laffy's port side. The explosion drenched the burning destroyer with seawater that helped suppress fires. The 22nd and final Kamikaze approached at 0947. By now, Laffy had been under continuous attack for 80 minutes. The crew exhausted, ammunition running low, defensive firepower reduced by 70%. But Landing Craft Support Large 51 had been fighting alongside Laffy throughout. Lieutenant Chering ordered maximum speed and positioned his gunboat between the Kamikaze and the destroyer. The Val pilot had seconds to choose. Continue toward the valuable destroyer target or accept the lesser gunboat. He chose Laffy. The Kamikaze passed 50 feet over LCSL 51, its fixed landing gear nearly striking the gunboat's mast. Chering's gunners poured fire into the aircraft's belly. The Val began trailing smoke, then flame. It crashed into the sea, 100 yards from Laffy. The battle was over. Laffy had survived 22 Kamikaze attacks in 80 minutes, hit by 6 aircraft and 4 bombs, 32 killed, 71 wounded. But she remained afloat. Her survival seemed impossible until the mathematics revealed the truth. Laffy's gunners had fired over 8,000 rounds of ammunition. They destroyed 9 Kamikaze aircraft with direct gunfire and damaged 4 others severely enough that they missed or crashed short. The fire control radar, despite battle damage, had maintained tracking solutions through most of the engagement. The proximity fuses had multiplied defensive effectiveness, turning near misses into kills. The Combat Information Center had coordinated defense even when partially disabled. Technology and training had prevailed over sacrifice, but barely. The margin between survival and destruction measured in seconds and yards. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe, enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The human cost of radar picket duty became staggering as the Okinawa campaign progressed. Between April 1st and June 22nd, 1945, 15 destroyers and destroyer minesweepers were sunk while on picket station. 45 more were damaged. Over 4,900 sailors killed or wounded on the picket stations alone. The destroyers had fulfilled their mission as electronic sentinels and magnets for enemy attacks. They had protected the main fleet by sacrificing themselves. USS WWII. Hadley's ordeal on May 11th demonstrated both the evolved capability of integrated radar defense and the brutal reality that numbers could overwhelm even the most sophisticated technology. At Radar Picket Station 15, 60 miles north of Point Bolo, Hadley and destroyer USS Evans maintained station with 4 landing craft support vessels in diamond formation. At 0750, radar operators detected incoming raids. Multiple contacts bearing 320 degrees. Range 62 miles. Composition estimated at over 150 aircraft. This was Operation Kikusui 6, one of the largest coordinated kamikaze attacks of the entire campaign. The Combat Information Center went into action immediately. Fighter direction teams vectored 12 combat air patrol aircraft toward intercept positions. The destroyer's guns went to full alert. Support craft formed defensive circle around the picket station. What followed was 90 minutes of continuous combat that stretched radar-directed defense to its absolute limits. The Japanese attack came in waves, individual aircraft, small groups, mass formations, from all directions simultaneously, high altitude, wave-top height, diving from cloud cover. The kamikaze pilots had learned every tactic, exploited every weakness in American radar coverage, and pressed their attacks with suicidal determination. Hadley's Combat Information Center managed 6 separate radar plots simultaneously, while directing 12 combat air patrol fighters and coordinating gunfire with 3 supporting ships. The SP height-finding radar tracked aircraft at multiple altitudes. The SC-2 air search radar maintained continuous sweep of approaching threats. The SG surface search watched for surface craft and low-altitude aircraft. The Mark 22 fire control radar locked onto targets for precision gunnery. The integration worked with mechanical precision for the first hour. Combat Air Patrol destroyed 32 kamikaze aircraft before they reached attack range. Hadley's guns shot down 12 more. Support craft added 3 additional kills. The radar provided detection. The fighters provided distant interception. The guns provided close-in defense. The system functioned as designed. But 150 aircraft attacking simultaneously exceeded the capacity of any defensive network to completely stop. At 0830, a Zero fighter broke through the fighter screen and crashed into Hadley's after-engine room. The explosion killed 17 men instantly and knocked out half the destroyer's propulsion. Speed dropped from 30 to 15 knots. Maneuverability compromised at the worst possible moment. 2 minutes later, a Naval crashed into the base of Hadley's forward stack. The impact destroyed radar aerials and communications equipment. The electronic eyes that had guided the defense went dark. Fire control radar offline. Air search radar damaged. The Combat Information Center filled with smoke. Hadley reverted to visual fighting, 19th century methods against 20th century threats. 3 more kamikaze aircraft struck in rapid succession. Gun Mount 52 destroyed, 40mm Mount 41 knocked out, 20mm Mounts 3 and 4 obliterated. Fires spread across the superstructure. Explosion. Steering control lost. Hadley drifted helplessly, while additional kamikaze aircraft circled overhead like sharks sensing blood. The destroyer Evans, fighting alongside Hadley, faced similar overwhelming assault. 4 kamikaze strikes in 6 minutes. Power lost to all after guns, forward fire room destroyed, steering control severed. The 2 destroyers, crippled and burning, continued fighting with whatever guns still functioned. Manual operation, local control, no radar direction, no fire control computing, just human eyes, human judgment, and the desperate determination to survive. The Combat Air Patrol, now out of ammunition but refusing to abandon the destroyers, made repeated mock attacks to distract kamikaze pilots. The Corsair and Hellcat fighters dove toward approaching aircraft without firing, forcing them to break off attack runs. Several fighters intentionally flew between kamikaze aircraft and the destroyers, creating obstacles the suicide pilots had to avoid. One Marine pilot, Captain Jeremiah O'Keefe, maintained station at masthead height despite losing his weapons, his presence alone causing 3 kamikaze pilots to abandon their dives. When the attack finally ended at 0920, Hadley had been struck by 4 kamikaze aircraft and suffered 30 bomb near misses, 28 men killed, 67 wounded. The destroyer was dead in the water, burning, her superstructure shattered, but afloat. Evans had taken 3 direct hits and 2 bomb strikes, 32 killed, 45 wounded, also still afloat. Between them, the 2 destroyers and their support craft had destroyed 89 enemy aircraft through radar-directed fighters and concentrated gunfire. Commander Baron Mullany, Hadley's captain, later reported that without radar detection and fighter direction capability, his ship would have been overwhelmed in the first 10 minutes. The early warning provided by radar had allowed time to vector fighters, alert gun, cruise, and coordinate defensive fire. Even after radar systems failed, the initial tracking data had positioned combat air patrol aircraft where they could continue intercepting attackers visually. The technology had provided the critical advantage that enabled survival despite devastating damage, but the cost raised profound questions about the sustainability of radar picket duty. American industrial capacity could replace destroyed ships faster than Japan could produce kamikaze aircraft. But the human toll exceeded acceptable limits. Sailors who survived radar picket duty often spent weeks at general quarters. Sleep deprivation, combat stress, the psychological burden of watching radar screens track incoming death, knowing the attacks would come, unable to prevent all penetrations regardless of technological superiority. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, who had helped develop kamikaze tactics, wrote after the war about the radar picket battles with grudging admiration. The American destroyers fought with incredible courage. Their radar gave them advantages we had not anticipated. They could see our aircraft forming up over our own airfields. They tracked us across hundreds of miles of ocean. Their fire control was devastating in its accuracy. But we believed the radar pickets were vulnerable because of their isolation. We were wrong. The radar connected them to a defensive network that stretched across the entire fleet. When we attacked a single destroyer, we faced the coordinated defense of dozens of ships and hundreds of aircraft. The psychological impact on Japanese kamikaze pilots became equally devastating as American defenses evolved. Surviving pilots who aborted missions reported the terrifying experience of approaching radar picket stations through seemingly solid walls of precisely exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of proximity-fused detonations appeared with uncanny accuracy. Fighters appeared from impossible distances, guided by invisible controllers aboard ships the pilots had not yet seen. The Americans seemed to possess supernatural awareness. Japanese intelligence correctly identified radar as the source of American defensive capability, but lacked the technical sophistication to develop effective countermeasures. The Type 22 radar, Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible. Japanese industry, devastated by strategic bombing and resource shortages, could not manufacture the precision components required for radar systems comparable to American equipment. The technological gap had become insurmountable. Vice Admiral Ugaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American defenses. The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe. Their radar seems to see everything. Our pilots report that American fighters appear before they reach the target area, as if summoned by invisible signals. The Americans have created an invisible wall around their forces. We see the target but cannot reach it. Technology has defeated spirit. By late May 1945, Japanese naval intelligence estimated that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were reaching their targets, compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign 6 months earlier. The difference was primarily attributed to improved radar coverage, enhanced fighter direction procedures, proximity-fused ammunition, and the radar picket system that provided early warning and absorbed the fury meant for more valuable targets. The industrial statistics told a story of American technological supremacy that Japan could not match. By June 1945, American factories were producing radar sets at rates exceeding 200 per month. Proximity fuses at 70,000 per day. The entire war effort would see over 22 million proximity fuses, manufactured at a cost exceeding $1 billion in 1940s currency. The massive investment proved worthwhile when Navy analysis indicated that radar and proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, by contrast, had collapsed under the weight of strategic bombing and resource blockade. Aircraft production had fallen to fewer than 500 planes monthly, most of obsolete design. Radar development remained primitive. Pilot training had been reduced to barely 100 hours, down from 500 hours in 1941. The exchange rate that had briefly favored kamikaze tactics swung decisively toward American technological and industrial advantage. The radar picket destroyers had not just defended against kamikaze attacks, they had demonstrated the future of warfare. Electronic systems would determine battles, information superiority would prove more decisive than firepower. The ability to detect and track threats beyond visual range would become the ultimate weapon. The moment when technology became the dominant factor in military success. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, credited radar pickets with making the Okinawa invasion survivable. In a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations, Spruance wrote, "The radar picket system proved indispensable to our defense against suicide attacks. These destroyers bore the brunt of enemy assault and suffered accordingly. But they provided early warning that allowed us to position fighter coverage and coordinate defensive fire. Without this electronic fence around our forces, the kamikaze attacks would have reached the transport area and caused catastrophic casualties among troops and supplies." Admiral Mark Mitchell, whose flagship USS Bunker Hill survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, partly because radar-directed fighters destroyed 3 other attackers, acknowledged the transformation radar had created. His chief of staff, Captain Arleigh Burke, later recalled during a 1978 interview, "The radar picket destroyers were the most important innovation of the Okinawa campaign. They extended our awareness far beyond visual range. They turned the invisible into the visible. Without those destroyers and their radar systems, our losses would have been unbearable." The final accounting was sobering yet decisive. During the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others. Terrible losses. But they represented survival of the vast majority of ships attacked, a rate that would have been impossible without radar detection and coordinated defense. The 4,900 American sailors killed by kamikaze attacks at Okinawa, while representing the Navy's bloodiest battle, were a fraction of casualties that analysis predicted without radar technology. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots expended in organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikusui operations, plus hundreds more in improvised suicide attempts, achieving tactical results that fell far short of strategic requirements. The kamikaze pilots, brave young men sacrificed to a lost cause, flew into an electronic killing field their commanders never fully anticipated. Their deaths, while achieving tactical damage that horrified American sailors, failed to achieve the strategic goal of making invasion costs unbearable. The radar pickets had absorbed the fury meant for the invasion fleet, had provided early warning that enabled coordinated defense, had demonstrated that electronic warfare had replaced visual combat as the determining factor in naval superiority. The invisible battlefield created by radar would define all future conflicts. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, dozens of destroyers rest on the ocean floor alongside hundreds of Japanese aircraft. Their crews honored by both sides for courage in the face of impossible odds. But their sacrifice marked more than heroism. It marked the moment when radar operators in darkened combat information centers became more important than lookouts on bridge wings. When mathematical calculations replaced warrior intuition, when technology became the dominant factor determining victory or defeat, the future belonged to nations capable of producing sophisticated electronics and training operators to use them effectively. The radar picket destroyers of Okinawa had not just won a battle, they had revealed the nature of all future warfare. The invisible electronic battlefield would determine outcomes. The nation with superior sensors, processing systems, and data networks would dominate. The age of electronic warfare had begun, written in the steel and blood of radar picket destroyers that stood between kamikaze pilots and the American fleet. Their legacy lives not in armor or guns, but in the radar arrays that gave them power to see death approaching from beyond the horizon and the integrated defensive networks that transformed detection into survival. The Japanese kamikaze pilots had never expected the electronic sentinels circling the Pacific, had never anticipated that American destroyers could see their aircraft forming up over Japanese airfields 300 miles distant. had never imagined that invisible radar beams would guide fighters and coordinate gunfire with mathematical precision that defeated even the most determined human sacrifice. The radar had changed everything. The mathematics had shifted. Technology had prevailed over desperation, and warfare would never be the same. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.